link to people. Let's have some fun. No, bad. Don't do that. All right. We will just wait for people to get into. Looks like the comment section is rolling out good. And we are live. Okay, awesome. Just gonna wait on people. It's one of those times where I grab my food. Let's just go ahead and shoot the link out to people. Let's see. Go ahead, just throw that on there. Link is on my website. And we are golden. Let's just do this thing. It'll be fun. Gmail, Mind, other email. All right. Now we're just going to wait people's messages. All right. Hope everyone's having a good time so far. It's been 2 minutes and we haven't had a question yet. I like it. Still nothing. It's okay. I'm gonna give you guys like 3 minutes to all like get into the room and stuff and have all your questions. We got 22 people. Nice. Looks like we got a question coming up. So I'm gonna give you guys like 2 minutes to kind of like matriculate into the room and we're gonna start. So I'll be right back. All right, let's do it. We got 30 people. Holy crap. It's more than we've had cumulative in like all these videos so far. Okay, so we have, the first question is what led to the age of reform? So what we're going to be talking about with that is the age of social reforms. The 19th century was a big century in terms of social reforms. We're talking abolition, we're talking temperance, we're talking prison reform, education reform, we're talking about women's rights. So it all pretty much starts with this transcendentalism thinking. People are starting to like leave the city and go into the forest and start to think. And one of the big fundamentals of transcendentalism that kind of inspires people to lead to social reform is this idea of free thought. And the big person you have to think about is Margaret Fuller. And Fuller is especially meaningful to the for the women's rights movement, the early feminist movement. She inspires people like Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony to kind of say, look, our life sucks as a woman. We really need to go out and take what's rightfully ours. And in this case, it's this idea of suffrage, and they want to become members of the democratic system because at this time, after Andrew Jackson becomes president, every white man can vote whether they have property or not. Women are at the same, social status in terms of voting as slaves and immigrants, which is not good. Then you have to think about the Second Great Awakening, and you talk about this religious revival, the spread of Methodism and evangelicism and Baptist Christianity. This idea that people are going to become more moral in terms of Christianity. They want to be able to, they start to have like this conscience that, oh, you know what, slavery is actually really bad. These people are humans and we're kind of treating them like dirt. And so this is where abolition starts to take off with white people like William Lloyd Garrison, but also former slaves like Frederick Douglass and David Walker, who are two black abolitionists who go off and speak. You also have the Grimke sisters, who kind of dip their hand in both pot, and are the Grimke sisters, those twins. I don't know if they're twins, but they're definitely sisters. And they're speaking out in terms of women's rights and also slave rights. And they're basically saying how the two are pretty similar. Garrison writes The Liberator. He calls for like the immediate end of slavery. Frederick Douglass, he writes The North Star. He also calls for the end of slavery. And he'll play a much bigger role in the Civil War when he kind of talks to Lincoln about you should really try to end slavery. And then David Walker, he's the kind of guy who is going to push for the fight that, you know, African Americans should just fight for their freedom rather than just wait for white people to give it to them. Okay? All right. Let's look at this. All right. Nullification crisis. That's a good question. So if we look at nullification crisis, this is Andrew Jackson, and this is a huge problem in the 1828 specifically. So the Tariff of 1828 has got that bad Tariff of Abominations name. And if you don't remember tariffs, people in the South hate tariffs because most people are farmers or plantation owners. And as my roommate who's from Virginia says, he just does not like northern things like tariffs.
Boo, tariffs.
Yeah, he's booing. I, as a New Yorker, I guess I'm supposed to love them. And the whole thing about tariffs is that when you have the South, they're primarily agriculture. You remember, big plantations. They have a lot of cotton. And what happens is they were tending to make all of their products at home, but also their investments aren't in industry. They're in slavery. So for them, it's kind of like they're getting screwed. And pardon my language, but they're getting screwed over. And in this case, what happens is the North is going to benefit because they're going to produce the products, and the South can't buy their cheaper European products that they once were buying. So if they have English or British shirts, for example, that they can buy for like 50 cents, and the American ones are $1, and then the tariffs make the British ones more expensive, then the Americans lose their choice. And so what happens is there's this huge problem with South Carolina specifically, which South Carolina is going to secede from the Union in the 1860s, but they try to in 1828, basically by saying they have this nullification ability. They have the ability to overthrow the government. It's a decision. They get to overrule it, not overthrow, overrule the government's decision. They get to just say, we're not doing that. And the person behind this whole thing is this guy, Robert Hayne, but also John C. Calhoun, who's like the vice principal. He's like Andrew Jackson's second in command. He's just like, yeah, no, we don't have to do that. We're just going to not do it. So in 1832, when Jackson passes yet another tariff, or Congress passes the Congress passes it and Jackson supports it, they actually nullify the law. And Jackson is infuriated because he's a guy of super control, and when people go against him, it's not good. So what does Jackson do? Well, John C. Calhoun resigns and leads this whole nullification in South Carolina. And what Jackson does is he sends in the army. He just sends them in and goes, you're going Sheriff of Nottingham, door to door, collecting taxes on people because they're paying. And then, of course, Henry Clay comes in, 1833. The great compromiser, he makes the tariff of 1833, throws down a compromise. Everybody's happy. Civil War is averted for about 30 years. Good job, Henry Clay. I guess one of the strongest presidential candidates to never actually become president. Poor Henry Clay. All right. Let's talk about Gibbons versus Ogden. All right, Gibbons versus Ogden. I think this is, let's see, my brain remembers it's like 1819, 1820. So Gibbons and versus Ogden, basically this is two rich guys who own steamship companies, thanks to Robert Fulton's invention in 1801. And what happens is Ogden owns a monopoly. And if you don't know what a monopoly is, it's one single business that controls an entire market. And he has a monopoly on a river, on the riverboat. And what he's going to do is he's going to control the riverway. And you can't, I mean, there was no anti-monopoly laws at that time. So what he was doing was technically legal. But when he prevents Jay Gibbons from getting a New York State license to operate a steamship on the river, Gibbons says that the river is technically between two states, therefore becoming a federal problem, and that the federal government should overrule it because they control this thing called interstate commerce. John Marshall, who's the Supreme Court Chief Justice, agrees with Gibbons. He says that because of Article 1, Section 3, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, I think that's it. Yeah, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, Interstate Commerce Clause. And with the Interstate Commerce Clause, it states that the federal government controls trade between a state and a foreign country, states and Native Americans, and states and states. It doesn't control the state's trade in general, just if it gets involved with another foreign party or another state.
1824.
What?
It's the date.
Oh, apparently it's 1824. But whatever, 1820, same thing. All you need to know is that in terms of federalism, federalism is why Gibbons beats Ogden. It's this idea that the federal government will generally reign supreme over the states. This is going to be something in the Marshall Court specifically, especially with McCullough versus Maryland, especially with future court cases down the road. Okay, all right, let me take a look at any other questions. Look like we still have 35. That's pretty good. The dinner choice tonight, pork chops and broccoli. Always eat your vegetables, kid. They're good choices. They make you big and tall, like Mr. C. Let's see. Let's take a look at the YouTube video itself. Okay. Looks like we don't have any other questions. Remember, guys, if you have any sort of questions, we're talking study guide questions, any sort of questions of something you maybe missed or something you need to go over again, this is the time to do it. This is your time to kind of just anonymously ask a question and just let me know, because I'm here to help. All right. So I'm going to go step away, actually take my pork chops out of the oven. And yeah, I'll be right back. Wait, we got a question. Actually, hold on. Let's take a look. National Trade. Huh. Okay. Got a question about a national trade union. That's interesting because we really haven't really talked about that much in my classes specifically, but it's what it really is. It's the first trade union, and it comes out in Lowell. So if you want to talk about early unions, you got to talk about the first place in terms of where industry started. And industry starts in Lowell with the Lowell textile factories, and Samuel Slater sneaks over from England to the United States, and he makes this profitable textile industry. And it's great because if you were the first to do something like that, you're going to be just so rich. And in this case, the whole Lowell Mills situation was great. The Lowell Mills, although primitive in terms of industrialization, they were so important because not only did they produce textiles at a massive quantity, but they also gave women their jobs. And if you've ever watched a video on the Lowell Mills, they're kind of like somebody explained them as like sororities. These girls would live at the houses. They were like best friends. They had like a dorm mom. They lived there. They slept there. Obviously they slept there. They would just congregate in the areas. They never left, and the money they made would go back home to the farms that their parents maybe worked on. But in a way, it gave the women that idea of like that self-righteousness, this idea that they were actually doing some self-worth and self-sufficient behavior. And then they obviously formed a trade union. It's like, you could kind of describe the National Trade Union as like early feminism, this idea where these women are coming together and showing that they deserve to be paid certain wages. And it's a real good step in the right direction for women at this time. Okay. All right, let's take a look at led to the age of reform. We did that. Let's keep looking at these questions. There's a lot of good ones, I'm sure. Okay. What led to the Panic of 1837? More Jackson. Let me tell you about Jackson. That guy's crazy. He got into a duel once, and he got shot like right in the chest, like right in the heart, and he just stood there, pulled out his gun, and just shot the guy dead. He like lived with the bullet in his chest for like the rest of his life. Yeah. Anyways, back to the real question. 1837. So the Panic of 1837 is an economic crisis. It's like one of the worst in history. Like if the Great Depression didn't happen, the Panic of 1837 would probably be up there with like one of the worst economic crises in American history. What happened was Jackson was just not a big fan of the national bank. He hated it. As a person who got most of his support from the common people didn't really get a lot of benefit off the bank. It was mainly made for like those rich investors and the wealthy. So obviously those common people not really getting the support that they need. And so Jackson goes, he gets this proposal from this guy called Nicholas Biddle. And Nicholas Biddle is from Pennsylvania. And he goes, we should really recharter this national bank. It's doing a lot of good. National bank gives us one currency. It kind of stabilizes our economy. And Jackson's like, you know what? No, we're not going to do that. Throws the big veto down on the bank. And people are like, cool, we're screwed. It's game over. We don't have a bank. What are we going to do? And Jackson goes, no, chill. I got this. He goes, we're just going to take all of the money and redistribute it to all these little pet banks. And so a pet bank is literally like Jackson's favorite banks that he has. And he just redistributes the federal money into these state banks, the ones that he likes. On top of that, they start printing money, their own state money. And they just start printing it, and they keep printing it. And when you print more and more and more money, that's inflation, and your money's worthless. So when you have a lot of worthless money and you just keep printing it and you have a lot of it, it doesn't mean anything. And without a national currency to kind of hold it all together, every state's printing out different money, it's going to create a crazy amount of problems. And Jackson doesn't even care because at this point, he's just gone from the presidency. Martin Van Buren is the president at this time. This poor guy has to deal with the economic crisis that Jackson left, and he has to kick out the Native Americans from the Southeast and kick them out to Oklahoma. Van Buren got the raw deal, if you ask me. So that's pretty much what happens with the Panic of 1837. Let's take a look. Why did women support the anti-slavery movement? Well, that's a good question. We can go back to the original question, or the first thing we talked about. Women really sympathized with slaves because they kind of felt that their lives were very similar. This idea that, women were slaves to their husbands in a way, because if you read the technical language of marriage laws and marriage licenses, they're very proprietarial. Basically, men own women. Women are the legal property of their husbands. And I think and you have to look at the things that women couldn't do. They couldn't own land, they couldn't divorce, they couldn't go to school, they couldn't participate in the democratic process either by holding office or voting. So they're getting, they see slaves and they're like, well, look at them and look at us. We're basically the same thing. And so that's why they kind of jumped on that whole anti-slavery bandwagon. They're looking out for their own personal interests, of course, but at the same time, they are trying their best in terms of getting more support for their own cause. All right, question about the Monroe Doctrine. So we're jumping way back. All right, James Monroe, who doesn't nearly get enough, time, I feel like, in classes about his presidency. God wasn't actually that, he wasn't that bad of a president. One of the notable things he did, besides be pretty much unanimously elected in the era of good feelings, vocab word for you, Monroe, he did this, I don't know, he must have woke up and just felt real confident one morning and was just like, he takes a pencil and just like draws a line on a map and just goes, hey, Europe, you see this line? You cannot cross this line. We don't cross to you. You don't come to us. We mind our own, we mind each other's businesses. We'll take care of Latin America. We got Mexico. We got all those Latin American countries. We're fine. We're fine. You worry about you. We'll worry about us. There's no problem. And it's really funny that he's able to do that, because if Europe was just like, no, we're going to do whatever we want, we might not have been able to back up the Monroe Doctrine. It was kind of like an empty threat. We basically gave them like a empty revolver and just pretended to play Russian roulette with them. We're like, there is a bullet in here. You don't know which one. Do you want to find out? And Europe was like, nah, we got better things to do, like go to war with each other, which they did a lot. All right. What caused the Whigs party to form? Great question. Jackson vetoing the bank. That pissed a lot of people off. Once again, whenever rich people get angry, things get done in government. It's real weird. Like when the poor people are struggling, not a lot gets done, but when the rich start to lose things, oh boy, look out. Oh, everything gets done. And this is a perfect example. Jackson vetoes the bank. People lose their minds. There's a split in the Democratic Party, because at that time it's pretty much just the Democrats and the Democratic Republicans. Basically, the Democratic Republican Party goes away. It's just the Democrats and the Whigs. And it starts by Henry Clay. Henry Clay is just like, I'm going to make my own deal, my own political party, and we're going to run against you guys in 1832. And they lose by a lot. Jackson pretty much just takes him to town. And despite his, unpopularity from vetoing the bank, the common man, they symbolize Jackson. They really like him for what he does, and the common man really wins that vote for Jackson. So that was why the Whig Party formed. This idea that when Jackson vetoes the bank, Whigs are like, okay, and they just go form their own party. My computer's about to die, so I'm gonna get my charger. So I'll be right back. All right, sorry about that. Still got 42 people in this. You guys are dedicated. Although I did advertise this to a bunch of classes, so I'm surprised we're not at 50. I thought this would be more popular. Majority of the kids watching probably aren't even in my classes. They're probably in Bucks or Cox or Katz's class because they want to be successful. I applaud you guys. What did McCormick invent? All right, well, we can actually run down a list of the inventors and their inventions. My roommate's pretty happy that somebody mentioned Cyrus McCormick. So, as he's using a reaper. All right, we'll start off with Eli, good old Eli Whitney and his cotton gin. Eli Whitney did a lot more than the cotton gin. But of course, the cotton gin is the most important in terms of the Industrial Revolution because it changes everything. Slavery, for instance, was on its way out. And then Eli Whitney's like, you know what? Slaves are so inefficient. I'm going to make a machine that reduces the amount of slaves that we need because it's going to make separating cotton from the seeds so much easier. Plantation owners were like, wait a second, a normal slave can pick 1 pound of cotton, can now pick 27 pounds of cotton, meaning cotton picking isn't actually a losing industry. And then they were like, we need more slaves to pick more cotton to put into the machine to separate that cotton. And then slavery went up a lot, like a lot, like a real lot. Besides that, he also has interchangeable parts, which is huge because you don't have to rebuild everything. You just need to reinsert the slot, especially for guns. They can just put new parts into the guns, and it doesn't, you don't have to buy a new gun. You just put in a new part, and it makes it easier. Then we got to talk about Fulton, the steamship. Hey, look, not a lot of us have sailboats, but if you ever tried to sail with sailboats, you would know it's pretty difficult. The steamship, no, you don't need to, because all you need to do is put that coal into like a burner place. I don't know. I don't really know that stuff. But what the steamship does is it not only makes it easier to go up the currents of rivers and oceans, but also gets you there faster. So now less time to get between cities, which will make navigating rivers from, say, I don't know, Gulf of Mexico all the way up the Mississippi to the north, or from the Erie Canal all the way to the Hudson down to New York City, makes it a lot easier. Then you have Cyrus McCormick, who's the reaper. It makes farming a lot easier. Same thing with John Deere and the plow. Agriculture kind of boosts that whole economy in the South. Then you have Samuel Morse with the telegraph, and it's like, it's hard to explain a telegraph because it's a lot of beeps and pauses and beeps and pauses, but it's communication. And back then, you're saying that the only thing you could do was write to somebody or speak to them. It's kind of crazy because I know like most of you are like addicts when it comes to your cell phones, but like you couldn't talk to somebody unless they were in earshot. But with the telegraph, you could talk to somebody in cities and send a telegram out to them to where they live, and it would get there in a couple hours, maybe a day. But they would get it, and it would be instantaneous. So you could talk from somebody like New York to Boston. You could put in delivery orders via the telegraph, and then, of course, that would evolve into war, and you can send messages out on the telegraph, so on and so forth. And also connects with these inventions, especially the steamship and the telegraph. It's going to connect the North, South, and soon to be the West. Okay. All right. Cool. Let's go ahead and take a look at any other questions. A lot of them coming in. Let me just refresh this bad boy. Still. Let's see. See a question about the Hudson River Valley School. We never really talked about that in my class. I'm not really sure. That's going to be on the test. But if you want to know what it is, we can definitely take a look up at it. So basically, like the Hudson River School was just a romantic, it's like romanticism. It's this idea that, you know, you would go out and paint pictures of the Hudson River Valley, which I'm from close to that area, and it is quite lovely. You have the Adirondack Mountains, Lake Placid, Lake George. It's gorgeous up there. And, you know, the Romantic era kind of goes into Transcendentalism a little bit. It gets into this idea that people want to go out and paint nature, and they want to, it's God's nature, it's God's creation. You know, it's so lovely because God created it, and we need to really take it as it is. And what it is, it's a removal from the cities, because, you know, now that the Industrial Revolution is starting to come, cities are getting crowded. They're not really, but they're becoming more crowded. The factories are kind of disgusting, and people are pooping in the streets. So what they're going to do is they're going to leave the city, go into the nature, and go into nature and kind of just paint how beautiful it is, like painting pictures of Niagara Falls or the Hudson Valley, any of this stuff. And it's just, like I said, it's romanticism. All right, question. Okay, so we did not talk about this in my class in terms of immigrants, but we can talk about it right now. So in terms of immigrants, this is the first big migration of what we call Northern and Western European immigrants. We're talking about Germans and Irish specifically. And what happens is when the Irish especially come here, they are hated. They are. It's weird because obviously Irish people are generally white because they're generally paler than most other Europeans, but they're not seen as technically white. In the US, they're actually seen as below white people. It's like whites, white Americans, Irish, slaves. It's like barely above the slaves. And the Irish get a bad rap for a couple reasons. Number one, they're Irish. Number two, they're Roman Catholic. And Catholics and Protestants, man, I tell you, they are always butting heads. That's like always how it's been in Europe, and now it's matriculated to the United States. You have the Irish Catholics and the United States American Protestants, and they're kind of going at it. And what happens is there's this thing called the nativist party that kind of emerges. The nativists are people who truly hate immigrants. They're just like, they all need to go home. I know that doesn't sound like that still happens today because America is like this wonderful nation that totally allows everybody to come in nowadays and doesn't get scared by people of immigration. But the Irish get a bad rap for a while. They do a lot of hard work. They work in those really bad areas. They live in cities like New York and Boston, and they do a lot of hard work. And when the Civil War comes around, they post of the potato famine in Ireland, they really do make up a large part of the Union Army. And that's when the hate of the Irish kind of dwindles because people are like, well, a lot of them did fight in the Civil War, so we can't really be too mad at them. Let's just go hate the Italians. And pretty much what happened. Went from the Irish to the Italians. So nativism. One of our presidents, Millard Fillmore, who we haven't talked about yet, we will. He's a huge nativist. He's also from Buffalo, New York, and that guy just did not like immigrants. Not a lot of people liked immigrants back then, though. So, all right, I am going to go take something out of the oven. I'll be right back. All right, now that my pork chops are done, I can have dinner. This is great. What was the difference between the two Great Awakenings? What a great question. All right. So, the Great Awakenings. To understand the Great Awakenings, you have to look at the time period that they were in. So, when we have the first Great Awakening, we have to look at what it was about. So, for instance, the first Great Awakening, 1730s, and what it does is it's kind of this spread of Protestantism, and it's getting people on board with Protestantism. I'm not going to go too far into detail about it, but it's this revivalism. So people are becoming more religious. They kind of want the laws to reflect said religion in their local community, because we're still part of England at that point. And England is, of course, Protestant at that time after the Glorious Revolution. And it's the second Great Awakening, but this time it's a little different. It's a different form, where the first Great Awakening was all like hellfire and brimstone, everyone's going to hell, that's bad. This one's a little happier. Basically, this guy, Charles Finney, is going to organize these camp meetings in upstate New York, where your boy's from. And what he's going to do is he's going to have thousands of people just come and listen to him sermon about religion. And this is entertainment for people. Remember, there's no Twitter, there's no Facebook, there's no, that stupid video about the kid with the white Vans. It's not even funny. But that was their entertainment. And for a lot of people, that was a family get together. The whole family goes to these camp meetings and they go find Jesus. And that was a thing that they really enjoyed doing. But what that does, the Second Great Awakening, is it spreads, especially in the South, it spreads that conservative Christianity, that Baptist and evangelical and Methodist religion. But it also opens a door to other sort of Christian sects, and we're talking about utopian communities. Basically, people from the Great Awakening start to go and go, wow, can you see all of these like terrible things in our society? They start to look and they go, look at, we have slavery, we've got adultery, we have women who can't vote. Our life sucks. Let's take it, like, how could we fix it? Nah, let's just go form our own society. And so people like Brook Farm, Oneida, New Harmony, the other ones that I can't think of right now, they go and form their own society. Then you have the Mormons, and the Mormons are from Elmira, New York, very close to me as well. I have friends from Elmira. And Joseph Smith starts this religion that basically states that when Jesus died on the cross, he came to America and he had these, like the people that were living there, he converted those people into Mormons. And besides the Bible, which they read and they have as a holy book, they also have the Book of Mormon, which is something that Joseph Smith writes. And this makes everybody all sorts of angry. And they persecute him. And they just like threaten to kill all these Mormons. They kill Joseph Smith. And what happens is they're kicked out of New York and they leave. They leave. They actually walk from New York all the way to Utah. That is insanity. Like, I kind of want to just see how many miles that is. So I'm going to actually do the Google map of it. Let's go to Google Maps so you guys can see this insanity of how far these people walked. I'm gonna screen share. All right. Now that we're on the Google Maps, let's go to Elmira, New York. By the way, Elmira sucks. It is so boring there. There's nothing there. All right, directions. And we'll Salt Lake, Utah. Okay, that is 2,034 miles. If we were to walk, I love that Google can show us how this works in terms of walking. Yeah, that would take us 664 hours. Somebody divide that by 24 for me, and we'll figure out how many days that is. Okay, so actually,